I go, what are you talking about? Okay, he goes, he's like, he goes, Benoit's fucking with, and I'm like, are you sure? You know, and like Luger's there and everything, and he's taping his fist because, Benoit was playing.
You know Luger's stirring that pot like crazy.
Not even that. Those guys would work other people, but now they were getting worked, and Benoit knew that since he had them hooked, he was just going to milk this thing for all it's worth because he would get off on that. That was like, he liked jokingly fucking with guys. If he knew he had you and had you like intimidated or something, he would play with it until it came down, and then you just do because like he would do that to like the times we worked. I'd be like, hey, and he would just kind of like he'd intentionally like kind of like walk away from me and not say anything. Like, hey, you want to go over this? And he would just turn around and walk away. And like do his thing and stuff, all right, So, but like when he was time to go over it, let's go over the match, he just very professional and do business. But the one thing that you noticed, Madden, that I never noticed until you had talked about it, like I'd always see him, drinking coffee, right? Sure. And that was the thing to me. Is like I was like shocked at like if there was something like I'm not saying this is like something that would have caused Benoit to do it or like we never knew anything. But one thing that I did know is that it was unusual to me that I've never seen a human being drink that much coffee. Like he would before the day of the show. He would walk, like, how all the hockey arenas have, like, the runway underneath, the concourse, beneath the stands, this big circle. And Benoit would, and see, I would walk around it myself just to walk, because I'm a big fatso and I need to walk where I can. So I would walk around it, and I noticed that Benoit, like almost every day, would walk like an endless lap under the concourse. He'd always stop at the coffee pot every pass and fill it up. It was like drinking an endless cup of coffee. And he would be wearing, almost without fail, no shirt and his dress slacks. Right.
And he would just walk underneath. God, am I right? I pointed it out. You saw it.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't notice that until you said, like, yeah, that's what he did. But the funniest thing was, like, somebody would ask you, hey, where's Benoit? What would you tell him?
I would say, go to the coffee pot. He'll be there.
And not only that, bro, he always had, just like Scott had that toothpick in his mouth, he always had that coffee straw in his mouth, right?
Yep, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, chewing the coffee straw, drinking coffee. It was
chewing
like
the coffee. Oh,
yeah. But I never knew like that is what he was doing because I wouldn't just walk around the concourse like you did. Like you noticed that was pretty funny.
Well, yeah, and the one time to take that story to another to a conclusion. One time there was a three-way between Benoit, Raven, and Paige. On Nitro, and you know how Paige likes to lay everything out, and Benoit pointedly did not, correct?
Right, of course not.
So Paige had this script, and he was looking for Benoit, and I actually told him, well, just wait by the coffee pot. And then, of course, I waited by the coffee pot because I had to see what would happen. So Benoit, sure enough, comes by, and Paige goes up to him with the script. Benoit doesn't break stride. He grabs the script, rips it like 50 pieces, and just keeps walking.
That's the first time that I really found out that he had a script, a DDP, because Benoit told me about it. And he was like, can you believe that this guy wrote stuff down? No, bro. I mean, you know how DDP is. He's very, like, passionate about everything that he did. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
To the point.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I can't criticize that, Konnan, but sometimes it went a bit too far. Like in WWE, they pointedly told him in that match with Undertaker, Hunter pointedly told him, do not go to Undertaker with a script. And sure enough, the next thing Hunter knows, he's looking across catering, and Paige is sitting there showing a script to Undertaker.
Jeez.
What a shame.
This is, what do you, I mean, Chris and Eddie, like how long were Chris and Eddie like best friends? Like, when did their friendship start? Like how long were they like tight?
I think that dates back to ECW, right, Konnan?
No, I think Japan, right?
Oh, that's right. Pegasus Kid and Black Tiger, for sure. That's when it started.
That's right, and that's like in 1908. No, I didn't realize Chris was that far ahead of me. He was like in Japan in like the late 80s. I mean, I broke in like 94, 95. Like I got or 92, but I mean. 95 was in WCW. That's like starting to get good. I didn't know he was that far ahead of me because we were. I think we were the same age.
Like I said, those guys were such lifers. They wrestled when they were teenagers. Like when Eddie passed, I think he was 38, and Chris was I think 40. But if you look back at their careers, it seemed like they should have been much older because they really did start so young. It's like Sean Waltman. He never seemed to age because he started when he was literally, I think, 16.
Yeah, and he's like, it never really changed, right?
Right.
Except from the mullet to the curly hair. The curly long hair is about the only thing. So, oh my God.
I think, let me just say this. I think at the end, you guys, when I try to like put everything together, like we'll never really know how much CTE he had because from what I understand, when they finally went to the house to get him, like his brain was kind of decomposed because, you know, it'd been there for a couple of days and it was like during the summer. But I also saw where the guy was pointing out, the guy that worked with Nowitzki, that he had tail proteins in his brain, which obviously was to be expected. But I do think that Eddie passing away, not like Joe said, not having the support system of grunge there, the fact that, you know, he was writing in a journal, you know, when that Vicky caught him, you know, laying in Eddie's bed, you know, he had a big part of him left when Eddie left. And then I think that once he started to become distant and start acting irrationally by taking different ways home and all the other things we all know about, and then getting into fights with Nancy and reading some of these texts where she's telling him to be a man and he's 44 years old and now they're fighting and maybe she thinks there's some infidelity, you know, just led him to crack.
How about this? What do you think about this? What if, like Chris, because he had problems, you know, like maybe he had, you know, maybe he was starting to show signs of CTE, maybe, you know, he was having problems at home with Izzy, you know, something. What if he lost the only people he could talk to about that stuff? You know, what if Eddie was like one of the only guys that he could confide in? Because he didn't really, but bro, Benoit didn't have like a lot of people that he was like open with and stuff. And like Eddie was his best friend. It's like, what if that just like the fact that he couldn't talk to people about his problems anymore, especially with grunge passing and stuff, everything. It's just all that stuff inside him that he would like to share with people to get out. It just all erupted at one time, you know.
Well, especially when he was very reserved to begin with.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just surprised he didn't talk to Nancy about it because she was like one of the boys, so she would have, you know, understood and probably been able to talk.
No. My problem is, what if he was having problems with Nancy, and he can't talk to Nancy about it? He's Eddie was his guy, his confidant. He could, you always talk about his problems to, and it's like, you know, like he really missed, like, you know, maybe that's why it hit him so hard.
Well, he had
it's like shit. It's like losing my mom or my dad because those are, you know, like the person I talk to that I confide everything, and I don't have that person anymore. You know?
You know who said that they talked to Chris that Thursday night before it happened, Friday and Saturday or whatever? And I'd never heard this before. It was Shane Helms.
Oh, really?
He said he talked to him Thursday night. Because I do his podcast, and he mentioned it and said that someday he'll cover it, but he's never like told the story before what they talked about. But he said it got really deep and emotional and everything. So things were going on just, you know, that Thursday before.
Oh. Well, give me some last thoughts, Disco, on Chris and Eddie.
It's for Eddie, the guy, the both of them that they may have. I've never met. I've never met two guys that like worked as hard as they did in the ring, like every night, worked hard outside the ring, took a lot of punishment, took a lot. Like it's like, you know, like their heart and their body. Because they were so driven in what they did, they never realized that they had to give themselves a rest. And it's like, I think the fact that those two guys never gave themselves a rest, like never slowed down, never like, you know, like, bro, these guys would, you know, just work in you know, you go on house shows, those guys would work hard for 15, 16 just minutes on nights, you know, like hard, doing a lot of stuff, you know, very, very physical and stuff. And they'd go home, you know, they'd work out every day. You know, put stress on your body. They'd go home. When they went home, back to the thing, they'd still work out hard. They're doing squats. They're doing, you know, Chris is in the arena doing 200, 300 squats sometimes. It's like extra and something that it just shows you, like, you can work yourself to death sometimes. That the other factors that go with working your body and your mind and your heart so hard and never giving a chance to rest, it can break you down. And I mean, in my opinion, that's what I think happened to those two guys. is that they just never really stepped back and gave themselves a rest because they were so driven and so passionate about what they did.
Yeah. How about you, Mark?
Well, both those guys, like Glenn sort of said just now, they cornered the market on passion, work ethic, and accountability. Those were two guys, whenever something went wrong, they accepted their share in what went wrong, and in fact, more than their share of what went wrong. But Glenn brings up a good point in terms of looking at Eddie specifically, because I probably knew Eddie a bit better than I knew Chris, and Eddie was so self-critical, in conversations I had with him. Who reminds me a lot of Eddie is Sidney Crosby, the Penguin star, who's now 32. And he's the hardest working athlete I've ever been around. And actually, Eddie and Chris are right there in that category with him. But Sid's at the age now where I don't know if he realizes that maybe rest will do him more good than the extra workouts. And I think a lot of athletes who are traditional hard workers know when to pull back. And I don't think Chris and Eddie ever knew when to pull back. And whether that, hastened what happened with either of them, I don't know. I rather doubt it with Eddie. I think maybe with Chris, but I think athletes have to, understand when they're, 32 or 42 or whatever. It's not the same as when they're 22, and they need to change the way they do things.
Yeah. How about you, Joe?
I just remember as a fan that having that series of tragedies all in a row kind of pushed me away from watching for a while, because when you look at it from an outsider's perspective, it looks like Disco said, these guys worked themselves so hard that maybe it contributed to their early demise. And as a fan, then that's how you look at the business. Like, geez, these guys are putting themselves through so much and everything. And it's kind of, I don't know, it became kind of depressing to be a fan at that time, having to be, watch these guys for a decade or more, and now they're both gone because maybe they pushed themselves so hard and it affected them so much physically and mentally. I don't know, it just pushed me away at that time. It's
the only physical thing we do. Like, it's not, we'll call it a sport because we do things that athletes do. It's the only one that doesn't have an off season, literally. Like,
yeah, and maybe it should have that, or maybe a rotating off season where each guy gets X amount of time off. But just in closing, I miss those guys. I mean, when they went to WWE and WWE would come to Pittsburgh, I'd always, make it a point to at least see them, the day of the show for a couple minutes. And I remember the last story I'm going to tell is one time I was in the front row at a WWE show that both Chris and Eddie were on in Pittsburgh, just a house show, and they were in a tag match. And they kept a running conversation going with me during the match in the front row, which was funny then, even funnier now.
I tell you what, bro. As you know, very, very, very close with Eddie. Met him when he was 19. I would always go down to Juarez, which is on the border of El Paso, and he would come over I would cross over the border. He'd pick me up. We'd go do weights. We'd go to his house. He'd teach me. We were always together, bro, and in Mexico too. And he was always trying to get me into WWE. Always looking out for me. A big part of me really just left when he passed away. 99.9% of 100% of all my interactions with Chris Benoit were always positive. That was very hard for me to accept what he did. I think the only thing that would piss me off is if you were going to do something, well, why did you take Nancy and your own son? Just take your own life. You know what I'm saying? But we don't know what he was dealing with. And at the end of the day, bro, I'm glad that, I was able to work and meet both of them because they both left indelible impressions on my life forever, Very, very, very sad tragedy.